They're calling it the Afghanistan Papers, an obvious nod to the Pentagon Papers published decades ago that showed an effort to lie to the American people about the truth of what was going on in Vietnam. There's a bit more to dig into here about Afghanistan. It's not quite as clear as just there were people lying about this, although I think there were a lot of people who were certainly dishonest about this. There were people who weren't willing to do what they are supposed to do in these circumstances, particularly in the higher up in the military chain of command. Speak truth to power. Tell the commander-in-chief, tell the four-star what's really happening in Afghanistan. I hate to be the one to say this, and there are many others who could claim the same. I've been right about Afghanistan for over a decade now because I've been saying the chance of us accomplishing the mission, and really the mission is an ever-changing series of submissions, of other things that we said we would not do, but then we find ourselves doing anyway. Turns out that the mission was not possible to accomplish, and it was not going to happen. The Washington Post main headline is, "At War with the Truth. U.S. officials constantly said they're making progress. They were not, and they knew it." Now, this is where you're going to have judgment come into play about different individuals involved here. They will all say, well, even if I had my personal misgivings, I felt like we were achieving some of the benchmarks. They would find benchmarks to justify what it is they were doing. I mean, there were some stunning admissions in this, and this was through a FOIA, a Freedom of Information Act request, where there was access to a review of, here's what it is: a confidential trove of government documents obtained by the Washington Post reveals that senior U.S. officials failed to tell the truth about the war in Afghanistan throughout the 18-year campaign, making rosy pronouncements they knew to be false and hiding unmistakable evidence the war had become unwinnable. The documents were generated by a federal project examining the root failures of the longest armed conflict in U.S. history. They include more than 2,000 pages of previously unpublished notes of interviews with people who played a direct role in the war, from generals and diplomats to aid workers and Afghan officials. I was in Afghanistan a decade ago, and everything that they're talking about in this, and some of it is from some of the documents and the time periods they discuss, are from when I was in country. Nothing has really changed. In fact, if anything has changed, it's that things have gotten substantially worse. One unidentified contractor told government interviewers he was expected to dole out $3 million daily for projects in a single Afghan district roughly the size of a U.S. county. He once asked a visiting congressman whether the lawmaker could responsibly spend that kind of money back home. He said, "Hell no. Well, sir, that's what you just obligated us to spend, and I'm doing it for communities that live in mud huts with no windows." Here's another sense of just exactly what are. Remember, this is the elites. This is the intelligence community's best, the smartest minds in the military, the most brilliant politicians. We've had multiple administrations, both parties in control at different times. This is what they deliver to us with the most wealthy machinery of nation rebuilding, the most incredible military in the history of the world. What do they deliver to us? A quagmire. That is what Afghanistan has become. We're just barely holding it together. We have all of our fingers and toes in the cracks in the dam, hoping the whole thing just doesn't come down on us. And nobody in power was willing to say this while they were in power. People won't tell the truth about this. You want to get that extra star on the shoulder? Got to say that we accomplished the mission. You want to tell the families of those, the over 2,000 Americans who died in this war, you want to tell them that they were fighting for something that people can understand what the goal is? I understand that feeling, but guess what? There are other families out there who could still lose loved ones. And there were many families who lost loved ones after it was clear that this was not a winnable mission, not a winnable war. Where was everyone on this? Where were the people who were entrusted with the lives of our bravest Americans, men and women in uniform, serving in that country? They weren't going to turn the corner. They weren't showing durable progress. Look, I had a TS clearance. I used to see all the different assessments, all the different ways. I could read everything the military was putting out. I could read everything the State Department was putting out. I had meetings with all those folks, SF folks, State Department folks, JSOC people, Intel people, everybody. Nobody had a real plan to make this thing work. Afghanistan, one of the smartest guys that I knew on the issue told me was, you have to, from an infrastructure and civil society perspective, is 100 years behind Pakistan. This is what the guy told me. You have to say, once you understand that, now you understand where is this country really in the hierarchy, in the grand scheme of things, of turning things around and becoming a stable democracy that can defend itself. And the mission kept changing. Oh, is it women's rights? Is it education? Is it creating durable institutions? Is it, and everyone can always point to little bits of progress. Well, it's not hard to have little bits of progress to point to when you do the following. The United States, according to these Afghanistan papers, allocated $133 billion on reconstruction. That's not paying our soldiers, on reconstruction efforts in Afghanistan, $133 billion, which is more when you adjust for inflation than we spent to revive all of Western Europe with the Marshall Plan after World War II. It's because there is really no central government to speak of, no worthwhile central government in Afghanistan. There is no tradition of successful central governance. There is no desire for many of the people in Afghanistan to live under a true central government. It is a tribal society. It is a society that is riven with internal conflicts. And you have vast swaths of the country. You have huge portions of the population that cannot read, that have no access to electricity or running water. And we think what? We spend $50 million to build a cinder block school here and there, and all of a sudden this place is going to have some semblance of civil society. All of the decades of violence and Islamism and jihadization and the Taliban and Al-Qaeda and Pakistan and the ISI playing a double game against us, we were going to overcome all of that. One other part of this that you have to read between the lines a little bit because the media is not going to present it this way. The Obama administration was disastrous in its decision-making in Afghanistan. How many Americans even know that a vast majority of U.S. killed in action and wounded in that country occurred while Obama was president? Not after 9/11, not the Bush administration, not all the stuff about Bush and his warmongering. Oh, no. It was the Obama administration. And why did President Obama, who knew nothing about foreign policy or the military when he was commander-in-chief? People might say President Trump didn't have any background in those things either, to which I would point out, yeah, but Trump has better instincts about the reality of the world that he lives in, the truth of who the good guys are and who the bad guys are, especially in the war on terror. Doesn't think the Iranians are somebody that we're going to just bring to our side anytime soon. And also is willing to empower generals to make decisions on the ground in a way that Obama was not. All kinds of constraints, rules of engagement, issues that the Obama administration put in place, because there was always the primary concern of the way they were fighting the war in Afghanistan was, how does this reflect on Obama and his presidency? So we took a lot of casualties. We had a surge of over 100,000 U.S. troops in Afghanistan. Do you know what they accomplished, what they gained? Now that we can look back at this, and we need to be honest about this as a country. People just can't always say, no, but we have to honor the sacrifice of those who fought there by pretending that things are going differently in that country than they are. No, that doesn't honor their sacrifice. In fact, those who fought and died for this country because they were trying to accomplish the mission, we owe them the honesty of looking at their sacrifice and saying, how do we prevent more U.S. soldiers from dying in a war that we cannot and will not win. Where was the honesty? We have this massive multi-billion-dollar media apparatus in this country. We had men and women in harm's way. We were taking casualties. We had the Marines in Helmand province. We had U.S. military surging in and around Kandahar, fighting against the Taliban, taking the fight to them, walking around in fields reminiscent of some earlier conflicts where we've had problems in the 20th century, trying to patrol, trying to find the bad guys. Who are the bad guys? We don't even know. What side is supposed to win when all's said and done? What's the economy going to look like? There are still estimates that upwards of 80% of global opium production still occurs in Afghanistan. Do you know who controls all that production, by the way? The Taliban. So you know who has access to ready cash inside that country and can work with and pay farmers much more than they would doing anything else? The Taliban. You know what the American and British and other NATO allies, you know what our plan was for dealing with the opium crop in Afghanistan? I remember this. This is a problem from when I was there. We initially tried to buy the crop from them and burn it. And then we realized that just encouraged them to have more opium because we were buying it from them. So then we just showed up and burned it. Then we just had a program of eradication of the cultivation of the poppy plant. And do you know what that did? That turned more people toward the Taliban. Because they just care about feeding their families. They don't care where this opium goes. They don't care where the plants they're growing, who ends up using it in, nightclubs in Europe or in America or wherever. They could care less. How are we ever going to win this thing? How are we going to win it when we're training a military that we keep? And this was one of the places where there was the most dishonesty. Because I remember reading the reports about the Afghan military and their capability and their readiness. Remember what I told you? They can't read, overwhelmingly. Even many of the officers can't read. How do you keep lists of troops? How do you know who's showing up for duty? If you can, you're going to remember everyone's names. You got hundreds and hundreds of soldiers. You're going to just know. How do you do logistics? How do you, if you don't have requisition forms, how do you know how much equipment you need? How can you do intelligence work? That's going to be really hard. Can't write anything down. I guess you got to remember everything. How do you transmit information? Then you add to it, by the way, the opium crop. The concerns about the amount of Taliban infiltrators of our military and police training programs in Afghanistan. And that's where we also have these green on blue violence incidents where they have an infiltrator who kills one of our people, goes after one of our, or sometimes kills several of them at once. But also, there's a lot of them that are just feeding information back to the Taliban that we don't even know about. And then you have all the opium addicts who are signing up for the military. You have all the more senior figures, village elder types, who are taking large sums of money from the United States for ghost soldiers, people that are supposed to be there but never actually show up, but they're still getting the salaries for them. This has been the case for over a decade, and the only thing that we've been able to figure out is draw down our presence so that we're not taking daily casualties and we're letting the Afghans try to run things. Right now, Afghanistan is more deeply in the Taliban's hands than at any time since 9/11. How many of you even see that on the news or on TV? Taliban's just waiting. We're negotiating with them. They're just waiting for us to say, okay, great, we've negotiated our exit. We're going to go now. I know Trump visited on Thanksgiving Day. This doesn't change the basic reality, which is that we have no plan other than stay forever and just hope that the whole thing doesn't collapse. And that's not really a plan. Now, once you start to look at the way that this is played out in Afghanistan, I think it's worth noting, this is why some of us look at Syria and say, no, we're not keeping 2,000 troops there. We're not going to do this again. We're not going to keep making the same mistake of putting troops in an active combat zone where they're not there to fight and engage the enemy so much as they're there as some kind of stabilization peace presence in a country that's not at peace. This isn't South Korea. This isn't Japan. This isn't Germany. These are places where the realities on the ground are constantly changing, where conflict is a way of life. It's not going to change anytime soon. All of these things, everything I've read, I read the Post's coverage of it this morning, and yes, there's a culture, and it's a culture that exists in the military that I'm not familiar with because I didn't serve in the military, but I am familiar with it from serving in the CIA, where everybody wants to say that they're doing a good job. There's a lot of self-assessment that goes into these reviews, and there's a lot of careerism. It's very easy to justify to yourself, why did we spend all this money? Why did we send so many people? Why was I in Afghanistan? What was the purpose of all this? What were we doing there? Very easy to tell yourself, oh no, it's the mission. What's the mission? Well, I never really asked that question. We're just there for the mission. We're there because we're there, and we're told that that's what we have to do, and there should be no questions beyond that. Now, I'm not talking about the day-to-day of soldiers needing to protect themselves, protect their men and women in uniform, and work with their local allies on the ground. I mean, that's at the tactical level. I mean at the strategic, at the 30,000-foot level. Why are we there? What are we doing? Does anyone really think that there's going to be a self-sustaining, democratic rule of law Afghanistan anytime soon? This is, and some have been willing to say this, a 50 to 100-year mission. Do you want to commit to? We've already spent more money than we did in World War II on the Marshall Plan. You want to commit to spending 10 times that amount? Also, how about this for a question? How much do we really care about Afghanistan? A lot of places have a lot of problems. How much do we really have to spend there? How much do we have to exert ourselves as a nation to try to fix a place that has a lot of problems, folks? And I don't just mean problems of electricity and lack of access to clean water. That's obviously the case too, but a lot of cultural problems. Not a long-standing tradition of education, of women's rights, of minority rights. Afghanistan is a very regressive place, and that's not going to change anytime soon. And I could tell stories, and some of you who served over there in the military know exactly where I could go with some of the stuff that goes on over there on a regular basis. This is a country that's got problems that would, if people really knew what was going on sometimes, they would just say, we got to get everybody out of there right now. And here's what I take away from this. Trump needs to end this war. Hopefully he can do it before the end of his first term. It's not going to happen. I mean, I wish he could. That's not going to happen, but hopefully he'll do it before the end of his second term. He's got to end this war. Otherwise, we're just going to be in this place. We're going to have 10 or 15,000 troops in Afghanistan forever, and forever really just means until things get so bad that we have to pull them out in extremis. And that's when things get really ugly. Hope you're all enjoying watching this on Pluto TV, channel 248. Download the Pluto TV app of the You can watch the Buck Sexton Show on the 1st. That's our channel. Also, make sure you're downloading the podcast every day by 3 Eastern. It is up. iTunes, the iHeart app. Please subscribe and also give us a rating on iTunes if you would, team. All right, team, the FISA IG report is out. It came out while we were here recording the show, and I've been able to go through in the breaks as much as I can the last half hour. So go through the executive summary, and tomorrow I'm going to read the whole thing tonight, and by tomorrow we'll be able to go through in detail. But here's my top line. First of all, I was right. What I said at the beginning of the show, that is what the report more or less says. That there were errors, there was problems, FBI, a little slap on the hand for a few people there. They were sloppy, they omitted things, they basically made sure, they juiced the FISA warrant to get it up on Carter Page because they really wanted to go after Manafort, Flynn, Page, Papadopoulos. Those are the four. That's what's in the report. That was the axis of Russia collusion right there. None of whom colluded with Russia, by the way. It's all, remember, keep in mind that we're not just looking at whether there was abuse of an investigation where people were guilty of the crime alleged. We're looking at abuse of an investigation where none of these people did the thing that they were being investigated for. None of them. Not one. There are a few things here that I want to note, I want to get to. You look at this report, and look, it's bureaucratese. I'm not surprised by any of this. when you look at the way that they're setting this all up, it's to make sure that they say, okay, yeah, there were mistakes, but the mistakes in the FISA application were good faith errors. I'm here to tell you that that's not true. That these FBI agents, these people involved in this process, believed a conspiracy theory that they should have recognized as absurd, but that gained all kinds of credibility and momentum from a handful of deeply anti-Trump individuals, including Christopher Steele, and that then was laundered through the intelligence community, the intelligence process, and used to try and come up with a way to destroy the Trump presidency. That is what happened here. Let me read you this is from the conclusions concerning all 4 FISA applications. This is from the Inspector General report, which is just out. We identified at least 17 significant errors or omissions in the Carter Page FISA applications and many additional errors in the Woods procedures. These errors and omissions resulted from case agents providing wrong or incomplete information and failing to flag important issues for discussion. While we did not find documentary or testimonial evidence of intentional misconduct, of course, on the part of the case agents who assisted the OI in preparing the applications, or the agents and supervising agents in the performance of the Woods procedures, we also did not receive satisfactory explanations for the errors or problems we identified. In most instances, the agents and supervisors told us they either did not know or recall why the information was not shared with the OI, that the failure to do so may have been oversight, that they did not recognize at the time the relevance of the information in the FISA application, or they did not believe the information to be significant when it was missing. On this last point, we believe that case agents may have improperly substituted their own judgments in place of the judgment of OI or in place of the court to weigh the probative value of the information. They stacked the deck, folks. This is it. From the Inspector General, they stacked the deck to get this FISA warrant up. That's what happened. This is like a prosecutor who has exculpatory information against a defendant and decides that they're not going to share that information. Decides that they're not going to be letting the court know that this person has information that goes to their innocence. They never should have been able to get a FISA warrant up on Carter Page. It's absurd. What have I been telling you all along? It's an embarrassment that the FBI violated his rights in this way. If they could get a FISA warrant on Carter Page, they'd get a FISA warrant on anybody. Just, give some vagrant $5 to say, hey, Joe Blow is actually a Russian spy. Let's get a FISA warrant on him. I got a confidential informant here who says so. He's like, hey, buddy, thanks. Yeah, thanks for the $5. Let's get a FISA warrant. I mean, it's ridiculous. They're going to tell you, though, that there's no big problem here. Nothing to see here. Here's more. I mean, as discussed, the use of the investigative team obtained statements from Carter Page and Papadopoulos that raised questions about the validity of the allegations under investigation. For example, when questioned in August 2016 about other individuals who were subjects in the investigation, Page told the confidential human source that he had literally never met or said one word to Manafort, and that Manafort had not responded to any of Page's emails. As another example, Papadopoulos denied to a confidential human source that anyone associated with the Trump campaign was collaborating with Russia or with outside groups like WikiLeaks in the release of emails. Papadopoulos stated that the campaign, of course, does not advocate for this type of activity because at the end of the day, it's illegal, and that our campaign is not engaging or reaching out to WikiLeaks or to whoever it is to tell them to work with us because no one does that. Papadopoulos also said that, as far as I understand, no one's collaborating, there's been no collusion, and it's going to remain that way. This is all to a confidential human source. In another interaction, Papadopoulos told the confidential human source that he knew for a fact that no one from the Trump campaign had anything to do with releasing emails from the DNC as a result of Papadopoulos' involvement with the Trump campaign. Despite the relevance of this material as described in this report, none of Papadopoulos' statements were provided by the Crossfire Hurricane team to the OI attorney, and Page's statements were not provided to the attorney until June 2017, approximately 10 months after the initial Carter-Page FISA application was granted by the FISA Intelligence Surveillance Court. My friends, they just kept ignoring the FBI, kept ignoring exculpatory, kept ignoring contrary evidence, kept ignoring the undermining of this case, ignoring it. A case against a presidential campaign. Either the FBI is full of morons at the highest level, or something's up here, folks. Something a little more than just, oh yeah, we made some mistakes. Here we go, the recommendations. Our report makes 9 recommendations to the FBI and the department to assist them in addressing the issues we identified. This is from the executive summary. The department and the FBI should ensure that adequate procedures are in place to retain all relevant information and prepare FISA applications. The department and the FBI should evaluate which types of special investigative situations require advance notification to a senior department official. Address problems, clarify terms, ensure appropriate training, establish a policy, Office of Professional Responsibility review performance of all employees. Yep. Bureaucratic nothing. Bureaucratic nothingness. That's what they come up with here. It's exactly what I thought it would be, what I told you it would be on this show today and many shows before it. Yeah, we just made all these mistakes were made. All these omissions, all these errors. There's so much information here, by the way, where they presented stuff to the FISA court that they had information proved was not accurate, but they just didn't think that was important. They didn't think it was important for an investigation of this degree of seriousness. And this is about a presidential election. Is it possible, my friends? I ask this question in earnest. Is it possible for an investigation to be of a greater degree of political sensitivity than this? This isn't some little investigation nobody was paying attention to, that nobody high up knew about, and some mistakes were made. This was the single most important case that the FBI was handling at the time, bar none. The single most important case, and it's just replete. It is filled with errors, and all of the errors, remember, look at the trend, all of the errors made it easier to go after Trump associates, made the conspiracy live longer than it should have, allow the usage of law enforcement tools as weapons against Trump and his people. None of the errors helped Trump. None of the errors made the investigation seem a little flimsier. No, the investigation was made to look stronger by the omissions, was made to look more reliable than it was. And we are told that this is the way it's going to be. This is just it. Nothing to see here. Of course, the lackeys in the media for the FBI, only on this case, but they usually, look, let's be honest, the left usually hates law enforcement, unless law enforcement's going after Trump. And then they love law enforcement, and only the people that are going after Trump, of course. Here's the CNN headline right now. Start of Russia probe was justified but had significant errors. The start of the Russia probe is only justified if you're a moron. And there are idiots. I mean, Peter Strzok is obviously not a very smart guy. Not very good OPSEC either there, Peter. Keep some of that stuff off your work device, buddy. It's only possible if you could believe an absurd conspiracy theory that never made any sense in the first place. We're going to have low-level Trump staffers reaching out to Russia to try to get access to emails that, I mean, what? It didn't even, and who even thinks that these emails were going to be some kind of a game changer, by the way, folks? I mean, they don't know what was in the emails. I mean, the whole thing it's absurd, beyond recognition. It's insane. But the FBI believe this. The FBI believe that Papadopoulos, despite making very clear from a confidential human source that they won't identify, but we all know who it is, Papadopoulos is like, no, man, campaign's not actually coordinating with WikiLeaks. Well, then why are they investigating him? Why was this whole thing? Carter Page had helped the FBI deal with Russian spies in the past who had tried to recruit him and said he was too stupid to be worth recruiting, by the way. And they kept that information out of the... So Carter Page has already had contact with the FBI, knows he's on their radar, has worked with them specifically on the issue of Russian espionage efforts. And they're going to turn around and get a FISA warrant on Carter Page? Do you know how much derogatory information they were able to gather on Carter Page as a result of having access to all of his, phone calls, emails, everything, text messages? 0! Carter Page did nothing wrong. No collusion. George Papadopoulos did nothing wrong. No collusion. General Flynn, nothing wrong. No collusion. And Manafort didn't pay his taxes. That's what this whole thing's about. The country's been dragged through this for 2 years. We've been made to believe that there was some grand conspiracy and the Kremlin was going to supplant the White House. And no, it was all myth. All myth by a bunch of created by Hillary partisans and feckless bureaucrats who really think that their judgment and their power should exceed what anybody would ever want to have put in their hands. Devin Nunes put out something very interesting. He tweeted right before the release of the report, the American people will finally learn that the truth that the Steele dossier was in fact used in Obama administration's intelligence community assessment. Obama's dossier. What if the Obama administration decided to spread around the dossier, which, by the way, this report makes clear is a complete fraud, is a joke, is ridiculous? What if the Obama administration, though, spread this all around and then everyone got convinced because it came from Obama, it came from the president, the highest level, the intelligence community, the assessment? If they use this dossier as the start of their belief in this conspiracy, then the Obama administration is directly responsible for propagating the conspiracy. Then the reason why FBI agents could continue to believe all this stuff would be because they had been fed this from the highest level. They've always tried to keep Obama out of all of this, even though it was Obama's appointees at the very highest level that were looking at this sensitive investigative matter, SIM they call it. They were looking at this, and they weren't ever briefing President Obama on this? He had no idea? Nothing? Nobody really believes that, right? Nobody really thinks that that's what happened here. No one thinks that that's true, I hope. But they're going to do everything they can to cover up for him. They're going to do everything they can to make sure that we never find out what did Obama know and when did he know it. Think about this. I mean, I look at this report and my conclusion is, well, and of course, I was entirely right. And essentially, it's like I've read the report without reading it because I know how these bureaucracies work because I used to work in one. They'll always protect the bureaucracy. So that's true. You know what else is apparently true? President Trump said my tweet that it's simply mind-boggling that here we are heading into year 4 of the Trump presidency at a time of tremendous American economic prosperity and relative peace, and Democrats are still trying to ram the Russia-Ukraine hysteria down the American people's throats. Insane. Trump tweeted out, true. Fact check. True. High five, POTUS.
It's a good time to remind everybody dossier is just a fancy French term for a load of crap. And it's a big reason why respectable outlets all through 2016 would not run with a dossier. I know you wanted to, but you couldn't. And they waited until January 10th because they knew the president was having a big press conference in the atrium of Trump Tower the next day. And I tried to help out a network that night by telling one of its anchors what was true and not true in their reporting. I stand by that. It's still true, still untrue, and still true. And we'll see more of that today. But I hope that you won't just say there's nothing there, they didn't spy, There's nothing there. And anybody, which I think includes everybody in here and their parents, who covered collusion in Russia in the Mueller investigation at any point, owes it to the country to cover this too.
And yet, we all know what the media is going to say. FBI exonerated, the investigation was legitimate. If the investigation is legitimate because people can make very poor decisions and act like total morons, and we're supposed to believe that it's an accident that they did this when they all hate Donald Trump, they can create an investigation of anybody. Remember, they can investigate anyone they want. They can investigate anybody they want. We can't investigate anybody.